Right. Hi, everyone. It's so good to see you. Thank you for joining us. This is our final session in the Rose Foundation's 2024 convening, Power to the People, Strengthening Grassroots Advocacy. My name is Aurora. I am the program officer for our grassroots funds here at the Rose Foundation. And today we're going to talk about how to engage with the media to help amplify the work that you're doing. I hope you all brought questions. I'm really excited for this session. We have some incredible speakers. And this is the third in a three-part series on advocacy skills for grassroots groups. So if you missed an earlier session or want to share the trainings with others, please check out the recordings and the resources that we have up on our website. They're also all going to be emailed next week with the recording from this session to everyone who registered for the series. So please feel free to use those resources and check out some of the sessions if you weren't able to make it. And yeah, before we dive in, I just want to say a final thank you, because this is our last session, to our incredible interpreters, Polina and Marcy, who have been amazing. They do our convening every year. They are always amazing. They are fabulous. And we're so grateful to have them here with us today. And a big thank you to all of our speakers and the Rose staff that made this happen. It really wouldn't be possible without all of your help. So thank you all for playing your role and helping make this event come to life. Okay, so I'll be done then, and I'll pass it on to our incredible speakers, Nicole and Sarah from Water Hub and Marid from Community Water Center.
Thank you so much, Aurora. We're really excited to be here today to talk about working with the media. And I'm very excited to be joined by Sarah and Maraid. While we introduce ourselves and our organizations, I would love for you all to drop into the chat a little bit about your experience working with the press. Are you brand new? Have you done this a lot? And any particular challenges that you hope we'll talk about? We are going to have question and answer period at the end, and we'll pause a few moments for discussion. But I also want to invite you to raise your hand or unmute at any time when we're talking for clarification or if you have a question. My name is Nicole Lampe. I head the Water Hub, which is a nonprofit communication shop that works in service of the water movement. We do a lot of work with reporters trying to get more attention to water issues like drinking water safety, access, and affordability problems that affect many Californians as well as people all over the country. River health, drought, flooding. But we also work on digital media. We do media and public opinion research, and in general, just provide a lot of hands-on help to grassroots groups, in particular, working on water justice. I've been working in communications for, about 20 years now, and on water for about a decade. And I'll pass it to my colleague, Sarah.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me today. My name is Sarah Bucci. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the Director of Strategic Communications with the Water Hub. I have been working in environmental nonprofit work for 15 years and a focus on press and media relations and communication strategy for the last 6. I live in Denver, Colorado, but have done a lot of work with groups in California on issues around solar and energy equity before my time at the Water Hub and now working with the Water Hub. I'm really excited to see that there's a mix of experience levels in the group today. And I will be sure to share the embarrassing story of the first time I ever had to call reporters as a newbie on the scene to put everyone at ease as we get into it. And I'll pass it to Marid.
Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Marai Jimenez. I am a communications associate at Community Water Center, where we believe that clean water is a human right and not a privilege. Prior to this, I've had working experience in the Mexican Senate, and then also in the state water board. So shifted more from policy and regulatory work, um, focus on interpretation and language access, more towards just work on outside facing materials, working with media here at CWC. So excited to see those different narratives and how they all connect and share a little bit of that with you all today.
Thanks, Maraid. And we're going to keep today's session more conversational. We're mostly just going to be talking, but please don't feel like you need to take notes because we're going to share two materials after. One is a worksheet that will cover all the key recommendations and concepts and questions that we'll go over today. And then we have another worksheet or another guide that's more about like how to work with reporters who may not have as much experience covering your community, how to educate them, how to follow up when they may get something wrong, how to counter stereotypes or bias. So more to come via email from Rose, and then we're available afterwards if you'd like to chat further. I want to start. Oh, I should have said also, I'm currently based in Portland, Oregon, but I grew up in Merced, California, and the Water Hub has done quite a lot of work on California water on a variety of issues, including with our friends at Community Water Center. And I want to start with like why media matters, because it's a lot of work to get stories in the press, and I'm seeing this a little bit in the chat that it especially can be difficult to get local news up into the big statewide papers like the LA Times or the Chronicle or the Sacramento Bee or PBS or NPR. And I'm guessing that many of you who have limited experience wear other hats at your organization. And so this is one more thing to do. We believe that media is important because it helps shape our understanding of the world, right? Storytelling generally helps people make sense of the world around them and helps explain and really perpetuate priorities in society and in politics. It also helps inform or justify which groups get resources and which groups may be sacrificed or left behind. And so we think about press as a way to elevate issues that may be unseen or unknown by decision makers, and also a way to shift beliefs or arguments against solutions that we may be bumping up against. And a quick story from my early days working with the press. I came up working at the Trust for Public Land on urban parks and conservation, and did some work on projects there. But my first big narrative and policy campaign was at my next job working on marine protected areas, marine conservation in California. In 1999, California passed a law to create a series of protected areas off the coast. And there was a lot of opposition against them, and a lot of groups that didn't want to see these protections were calling them closures or no-go zones. And so all the headlines were like, fishermen oppose closures, or what do closures mean for coastal business? And it's really hard to promote conservation, as I think a lot of you know, when there's this perception out there, one, that they're going to be bad for jobs and bad for the economy, and two, that they're going to be places we're locked out of. And so collectively, the groups that I was working with decided to try to reframe these marine protected areas as underwater parks, because we know the concept of parks is familiar to people, right? It's not technical term. It's not an acronym, which there were a lot of acronyms in this policy effort. And it took a long time. We had to work with reporters a lot, and we, put forward ads and digital media and all of that. And eventually we ended up getting an LA Times headline about underwater parks. And I wish I had that to share. I don't, because that was like 2007 or something, and I don't think I had it digitally, but I wanted to quickly share the way that this like press campaign has continued to reverberate. So here's a California.com article recently that talks about the top 5 underwater parks in California. And then this is an aquarium the Santa Barbara Museum of Natural History that still celebrates Underwater Parks Day, something started by a lot of nonprofits as a way to like celebrate and elevate this idea that ocean parks were places too that we could visit and appreciate, even if you don't scuba dive or snorkel. And I want to turn to Marei to share a more recent example from Community Water Center's work using media to help set the stage for policy progress.
So recently we've been doing a lot of work on Prop 4, previously known as the Climate Bond, and this would push forward $10 billion towards climate change resiliency projects. Safe drinking water is included in that, and it's been a long work in media spaces. Before it was even on the ballot, we were just trying to even get it on the ballot in the first place. And at that point, it's where we talk about media being important towards specific groups like legislators, like folks involved in decision-making spaces. And let me share my screen real quick. Or it's a story. All right. So before it was even on the ballot, and we were trying to get legislators to understand that we needed something that is going to invest in communities, we managed to land the story on Public News Service. You can see the powerful imagery already with community partners all standing up for climate change, saying that we need investments now. And then it's a story that includes my colleague who works on policy, but it also includes a community partner, Rosa Carrillo, who shares her story of what it means to have climate change impacts in her community. And so these stories are crucial because we get into, yes, some technical aspects of this is money that we're needing. There are policy items that we need to get done. There's budget deficits in the face of all of this, but there's real life impacts and there are real lives that are impacted by these changes. And that's what makes a powerful story directed towards a particular audience, stating we can talk policy all we want, but at the end of the day, policy has real life impacts, and these people are sharing those impacts on what it means and why they're out here in Sacramento in the first place. They're coming up to Sacramento. They are advocating. They're standing as a powerful group to express this need. And through the media, we're able to show that. And part of that media push is what helped, and our partnership with this coalition is what helped push for the climate bond to become Prop 4 on the ballot this November. And now our media work is shifting towards explaining to the general public of what it means for what does Prop 4 even mean? Because I know a lot of people are saying we're going to go into a budget deficit. Well, we're already in a budget deficit. It's a lot of debt that will be happening. And we really need to share the narrative that these are actually investments for communities. So from here, we've also been working recently on a lot of media. One actually, ABC7 San Francisco aired a story recently as well, just describing the story in the Central Coast with a community partner, Kelly Hutton, and my colleagues as well in the Central Coast, just really describing today these communities are facing unsafe drinking water. And this is why we need to invest in these communities with every feasible opportunity that we get. So in that space, media has been helpful for us to shape the perception of these are solutions that we have on the table. This is why we need them, and this is what we're doing to advocate for them. And this is why we need support to start. This is why we need support from legislators. This is why we need support from decision-making spaces. And then in this phase, this is why we need public support. This is why we need our fellow Californians to join us in this fight for clean water and a safe environment in the face of climate change. So thinking of the different points of a story and who we're targeting, what we're speaking of on the same topic is very important, and how our media approach has shifted audiences, but we're still messaging the same items. We're still uplifting community voices throughout the whole process. That's how we work to shape narratives in the public space using media.
Thank you so much, Mari, for sharing. I imagine this Prop 4 campaign and many of the campaigns that your organizations are working on the call are not just working through the press, right? And so I want to invite Sarah to briefly talk about like what we mean when we say media. It's not just newspapers or radio or TV.
Thanks, Nicole. Yeah, so I know our session today is really focused on how we work with the news media, but I think I just wanted to ground us in the fact that there's a lot of different kinds of ways that we will try to get our message out into the world. And so when we talk about media, there's three kind of categories that we tend to put these communications channels into. So there's earned media, which is what we mean when we're talking about working with the press. So that's the kind of coverage that you don't pay for, but you also don't control. So it's getting a letter to the editor or an op-ed published in the newspaper, getting a reporter to cover a story. Some people refer to this as free media. I don't personally really like that term because it takes a lot of time and energy and effort. But that's sort of what separates media that you get through kind of like effort versus paid advertising. The second bucket is that paid advertising. So taking out an ad in the newspaper, paying for a social media post to reach a wider audience, bigger than that, things like billboards or advertising on TV. That is something you can control and you can target to reach a really specific audience you want to try to reach, but can also be quite expensive. And so often folks are limited by budgets in that sense. And then the third category, we would consider media that you own. So that means the communications channels that you use as an individual or organization to reach people. So that can mean your social media channels, it can mean your website, or if you have an email list that you use to communicate with members of your community or members of your organization, if you use text messaging to get in touch with people, that all constitutes media that you own. And so these things are pretty distinct from one another, but they definitely don't operate in a vacuum. So, oftentimes you might be able to leverage things that are happening on social media to get the attention of a reporter, to get them to cover the story. Or likewise, if there's, a really poignant or in-depth article or segment on local TV about your organization or issue, then you can use that to, again, post, post in your own channels, turn into advertising. So these things definitely all work together. But in this session, we're going to be talking about that media that you earn working with the press, and some of the kind of how-tos and logistics in doing that, as well as our kind of tips on how to do that effectively. And yeah, I see maybe the next session is mine, so maybe I'll just keep talking if that works, Nicole. And I see the comment about the social media algorithm. I think that is definitely a downside. One thing I think it's worth noting is no matter the channel you choose, there's always going to be pros and cons to each and every one. So working with the press can be really helpful because it's a way to reach a built-in audience for that outlet. There is some of that kind of like third-party validation when it's coming from maybe a trusted source in the community rather than directly from a group that may be seen as doing advocacy. All that to say, the flip side is, as I kind of mentioned, when you are trying to get reporters to write about something or cover it on TV, you give up a level of control over the narrative that you can do a lot. And what we'll talk about is kind of how to try and shape that, but that's definitely like the can be the con. Similarly on social media, it can be really hard to like break through to actually reach people because these are I guess to some extent the press is too, depending on the outlet, but like these are basically corporate interests that we're trying to like work through. And so yeah, definitely pros and cons to each. So I wanted to start a little bit. I have a background in working in public relations and have done the like, how do you craft a pitch to get a reporter to even pay attention to your issue? And so I wanted to start by asking the group if people were familiar with the idea of like what a news hook is before I go into giving my definition and some examples. And if you want to maybe put in the chat if that word resonates with you, if you've heard that before. And while I'm getting that, I'll also have like another question where I'm hoping folks might be willing to come off of mute and share some with us. I see Laura saying the juice of the story or something that catches a reader's eye, that gets a reporter or an audience to be interested. These are really great analogies. I like to think about it if you're a fisher person and you're out there and you're trying to reel in a nice trout or I don't know. I'm not an actual fisherwoman, so I don't actually know that many fish names. But say you're out there and the reporter is the fish and you're sending your line out to try to get their attention. The hook is like the bait that's on the end of your hook there on your fishing pole. And so it's what's gonna get attention, what's gonna catch the eye, as people have said. There's a couple of different ways that you can do this. One is kind of putting the news in news. So if something is like happening right now, if there's new information that's coming out, if there's breaking news around an event, say there's an extreme weather event, a storm happening, or an accident. It can be manufactured news, like say there's an anniversary or a milestone, a local happening, like an event, like the ribbon cutting on a project that's been completed, or calendar observance. So trying to get attention on the environment on Earth Day or World Water Day, things like that. Those are all of the things that can kind of get that attention. The other things that really matter to reporters are the characters in your story. So if you have something like, I guess the kind of term we use is like unlikely bedfellows, but like a coalition where there's folks working together that you might not expect. The unexpected can also kind of be that hook. If you're able to think about the visualization of an issue and how people can see it with their eyes, and that kind of conflict and tension as well as something that really drives stories that we found. One example I wanted to share, and then I have a question, because there's often like really important issues that we're working on, our community is facing, that we want to get attention on. But for whatever reason, important and newsworthy aren't always the same thing. And so I've been working on issues around water affordability and access for many, many years. It's something that has been challenging to get attention on in just the day-to-day. But we saw that with the COVID-19 crisis, this issue around advocates, particularly in California, were really able to think about how to frame their issues of water access and water affordability in terms of how water was a really important public health protection when it came to protecting people from the spread of contagious disease. And so one thing I'll share here, this example is from a story in Cal Matters from back in January 2021, where advocates were describing this headline, water as the most basic form of PPE. And that framing and being able to tap into the crisis of the pandemic and using the media to really generate a buzz around this is what led in California and many places to, unfortunately short term, but stoppages around water service disconnections, and eventually some financial support to help folks dealing with issues around water debt or unpaid water bills. So that's just one example, and this issue has not been solved. We're still working on it, and I can tell you today, it's so challenging to get reporters to write about this because we're not in crisis mode anymore, and that even though for a family struggling with it, it's a crisis every single day. So that's something I think that's really hard, and I don't have like all the answers on that. We try different things. So anyway, I'm kind of curious, and also to break up us just talking, to hear from the group if there are like issues or programs you work on that you were wishing were getting more attention, but you haven't totally figured out like the right angle to have that hook or to get reporters' attention. If anyone is feeling brave to come off mute and share. If you want to write in the chat as well, feel free.
I'll go.
Thank you, Susan.
I'm Susan Liley with Citizens Committee for Flood Relief, and I've been doing this for about 8 years, thanks to the Rose's help, Anthropocene Alliance, and Climigration. So many people have helped us. We flash flood. We're a small town in Missouri that was built in a riverbed, and we have a train tracks that run through us, and our city flash floods. We have 15 dams above us that were built out of tip and lead digs. And we applied for buyouts with Kelly Mann from Buy-In. And we got our first buyout earlier this year. And yesterday we had one of the homes torn down. Now, when you've been doing it as long as I've been doing this, you become friends with the reporters. You can text them, you've got their email, you've got their phone number. They usually want to hear it. They want to know what's going on. So it's always wise to make a relationship with them. I guess that's it. I
Thank
sent Aurora a picture of the house being torn down. 4 flood families no longer have to worry about drowning in our town. We still have 330 homes that are in trouble. Well, 326 now, but it's everywhere. It's everywhere. And we've seen a lot of disaster lately. But FEMA is working hard. I think they're trying, and I've never seen anything before now come alive. So keep working and keep hoping and keep trying.
Thanks, Susan. I think I'm going to try to, you chime in if I'm not recapping this accurately, but that one of the issues, especially when you're working on something, is it's happening day in and day out. And so a way to overcome that challenge of something being chronic is and getting kind of attention in the media is building a relationship with the local reporter or reporters who cover the issue most, so that when something is happening, you can reach out to them and have that pre-existing relationship to help make it easier to get their attention. I think that's a really good point. It's something we have on our discussion agenda coming up. So that I'll just, want to point out as really a really good point. Does anyone else have anything that they have been struggling to figure out how to like have a news hook for an issue that they feel called to share with a group?
Can I say something?
Yeah, hi, Marilee.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Well, so I've been working on environmental issues in Northeastern California for the past over 15 years now. And it is really, really difficult to get any news coverage. It's a very right-wing area, first of all, so locally it's hard. And then I always try all the bigger outlets like the Bee, the LA Times, the San Francisco Chronicle too. And mostly nobody ever even answers. I mean, it's not, it's not even that they say, oh, what's going on? It's just there's nothing. And so that's the biggest thing I've been struggling with for many years now.
Yeah. This is, I remember when I was, maybe this is a good time to share my embarrassing story to commiserate, because I think it is an issue. If you look at, and I mean, some of it's probably like the generous reading is, if you look at surveys of journalists, they get thousands of emails a day, and it can be really hard to break through. And we are always trying to, even for folks that I have relationships with, it can be hard to get a response. And so kind of playing with the level of, I don't know, creativity and subject lines just to get your email opened can be really hard. I have I remember when I was interviewing with Nicole for this job actually 4 years ago, and I told her I feel like my superpower is like handling rejection like a champ, because that's kind of what you have to do when you are doing a lot of media pitching. I think that there was another comment in the chat earlier when asking about basically like broadening a local story to make it interesting or catch the eye of some of those bigger outlets in your state. And that so there's like kind of 2 ways to go about that may or may not be helpful. And I think this is, again, just something that's like a numbers game, a lot of trial and error. But we find that either localizing a national issue or statewide issue, or the flip side is kind of broadening a local issue, can be good ways to, coupled with some new information or some unexpected partnership, can be a good way to get the eyes of a statewide environmental reporter, for example. And so if you are able to look at the issue that your community is dealing with and find examples, or if you have partners in other parts of the state where you can show that it's a trend or a part of that bigger story, that can be one approach. Another, and I see some hands and stuff, so I'll stop talking in just a minute, is if if you have a local elected official or state, an official at the state level who's based in your area, who is talking, maybe they're saying really off the wall stuff about an issue that you're working on, that can be another way to try and generate some interest from a state house reporter who kind of covers the happenings of, say, your assembly person. And then it's like sort of a way in to try to get attention on an issue. So it takes, I think, a lot of trial and error, but I think that can also be one way to make something have a hook. I see Maria's hand.
Sí, buenos días aquí. Nosotros somos de la ciudad de Shafter. Estamos reunidas aquí, señoras de la comunidad, del comité, para pedir una información o una ayuda para tratar de hacerle saber a la comunidad en general y aparte si se podría decir al estado, a todo el estado de California, porque nos están viniendo las industrias a este pueblo. Es un pueblo muy chico, estamos rodeados de petróleo, de pesticidas y todo, y se quieren venir grandes industrias a cargar y descargar a semáis, cajas de semáis, trenes, y ya con la contaminación que tenemos, ¿cómo podemos ayudar o decir qué hacemos para poder parar? Si no decir que no lo hagan, pues de perdida que lo hagan con las necesidades del clima, ¿cómo se diría? Con la restricción de lo que pueden, hasta dónde puede llegar y cómo poder seguir teniendo de perdida, si no un ambiente muy limpio ni un aire muy limpio, de perdida que no contaminen más, que haya restricciones de contaminación, porque aquí hay quema de leña, hay todo, el agua no sirve. Entonces tenemos miedo porque ya se están viniendo muchas industrias aquí y la comodidad de ellos es porque aquí será más barato, la ciudad les da permiso y estamos muy preocupados por eso. Entonces nosotros queríamos si nos podrían dar una orientación o alguien que pudiera dar información o nos ayude a pedir auxilio, ayuda a esto, que no se nos dejen venir tantas industrias. Gracias.
Thank you, Maria. I hope as we move through our agenda, we'll be sharing the kind of best practices to help you and your community hone in on some of the tactics that you can take to get attention on this issue as you work to push back against this industry. Before we move on kind of to the next section, I think one thing that comes to mind is the power of that local impact. We've seen some organizations to great effect collect stories and narratives from community members and pull them together into a document that they use to communicate with the media to say, here are some of the local stories and opinions that come from our community. And as we're really concerned or things are happening with the kind of permitting of these industrial facilities, that can be a way to start a conversation with a journalist about covering the issue. I also wanted to just call out before I turn it back to Nicole, the comment in the chat about the ability to generate media coverage is not always a reflection of like skill level. And I feel that so deeply. This is my job and I spend a lot of time on it. And I also often struggle depending on what else is happening in the world. So yeah, like election time can be really hard to break through. If there's other, if there's a natural disaster happening, it can be really hard to break through. And there's just the fragmentation of the media today can be really challenging to navigate. So these are not, it's not always, it's often the opposite of easy. And so, yeah, hopefully as we keep going through, we'll give some kind of simple steps to at least make it systematic for you, if not, and I guarantee it will not always be successful. And that resource that Aurora will share out will also have that stuff in writing, which will hopefully be helpful. Nicole, I saw you come off mute. Sorry.
Oh yeah, I wanted to offer Maria, and I also saw there was a question in the chat about raising awareness about a Superfund site that is at risk of flooding from sea level rise. I think that for these long-standing challenges, or sort of in some cases multifaceted challenges, where you might be fighting permitting of various industrial polluting facilities, right, or going on the long road to remediation for a Superfund site that's been in the community for years, I think events can be really powerful. And I'm thinking of, there's a group of climate change and clean air activists, including a lot of Indigenous elders in Northern California, that with Idle No More organized a healing walk from oil refinery to oil refinery to bring attention to how close, how many there are in places like Richmond, California, and how close they are to places that kids play, that people go to get medical treatment, et cetera. I've also seen other events. So for instance, Central Coast United for a Sustainable Economy in Oxnard, California, where there's every kind of heavy industry and Superfund sites. They've literally shut down permitting hearings by using nonviolent tactics like blocking votes. So I think I'm guessing a lot of groups on this call are grassroots organizers. And I think like using your community relationships and actually getting out either to a place where decisions are being made, or getting people, and hopefully along with them reporters, out to actually see how close either existing polluting sites or proposed polluting sites are to homes, to schools, to hospitals, can really help. Yeah, and then just want to say that like these long-standing issues, right, that is the biggest challenge. I think that we'll get into that in our worksheet, but reporters often will cover an issue in the moment of crisis and then move on. And that's doubly true, I think, for these big statewide papers. And that's why working with a local media maker, whether that's a blogger or a YouTuber, or your local Spanish language radio station or weekly, can be a really helpful way to keep attention. And then occasionally you can get the big national or statewide reporters to pay attention. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, Nicole, I was hoping we could, I'm like, our agenda flows like a little bit in
Yes, totally.
but I was hoping we could talk a little bit too about thinking ahead on the visual elements of your story, and wanted to ask Marit if she would be willing to share, because for even print journalists is a little less important, but to get like a TV station to come and do a story about something, or even for newspapers, the visual story of what's going on is, I think, in many ways just as important. And my My boyfriend is apparently locked out of our house, so I was going to dip out just for a second to open the door after I pass it over. So that's why I'm leaving, and we'll be right back.
Yeah, so I can jump on and let me share my screen real quick. When thinking about visuals, there's just a lot of things to consider. And for example, just a powerful visual that we at CWC Community Water Center really look to highlight is just what community power looks like. And I think this touches back on what was previously mentioned on um, what community actions are and how we can get media attention through community actions. Well, this is one thing that we can show to reporters saying, hey, look, this is what's happening. We share it on our social media as well. Community partners are meeting with decision makers. They are at the table, they're discussing their issue, and they're highlighting why it's important that this be something we focus on. We also have here just we also want to show joy and show that it's a powerful moment, and it's encouraging when community partners get this chance to be in these spaces, because these are spaces we're fighting to get into. These are spaces we're fighting to make a difference in. And so it's encouraging when community partners are there, they're present, they're speaking to folks, they're making their stories and their voices heard. So we love to share visuals like that as well on our social media. Sometimes reporters will ask us, hey, can you send us a picture of what this looks like, of what this event entails? And for example, I had a reporter from Univision ask me, hey, can you send me some pictures from this event? So we'll send that. And sometimes that's for them to get an understanding of what the area looks like when they go and film something. Other times they'll actually include those images. And so we also have images on what do these problems actually look like? Because it can be hard to describe water problems, because a lot of them for us at Community Water Center, it's groundwater. The infrastructure, the tubes, everything's below the ground. So what does it mean when we get a treatment system? What does that look like? And if we have the chance to show that, it's exciting news when we get something, a shift that brings us towards clean water. Um, for example, this TCP treatment system that a community partner here, Maria Garcia, she is looking at in her in her home, this new system that's installed. Or other times, more sensitive topics, we always want to make sure and check in with our community partners if it's all right to share these kinds of images, because we first off, we want to make sure that our community partners are never seen as just victims of environmental crisis, of drinking water crisis. We want to make sure that they are seen as empowered. So in this case, we worked with Sandra Garcia to show what it looks like for her to have to go get her gallon of water that she has to live off of. And she is a strong advocate. She's comfortable with media because of just years of experience working with media. She's often a person that will stand up and say, I want to share my story. I want to share that, yes, these are the things I have to do to get clean water, to get access to clean water. But I'm also going to Sacramento. I want to tell you about the advocacy that I am a part of by going to community meetings, by going to local water board meetings, by going to state hearings. I am sharing my story in order for people to understand what my struggle entails and what I'm doing to find solutions alongside my community. So these are sensitive topics for people. So when it comes to imagery and visuals, we want to make sure that our community partners are okay with this imagery that we're sharing. And we want to make sure that there's more than just a pity story, and that we're also sharing what powerful movements look like towards a solution when we're considering these visuals and when we're trying to share these with, whether it be on our social media, whether it be to reporters, making sure we're able to shape that narrative as well, so that reporters also have an understanding of what visuals we're sharing and what visuals we all feel comfortable sharing in these spaces.
Thanks, Maraid. And yeah, the point you just raised about showing like the power and dignity of people that are impacted by our issues, I think is one of the things that we wanted to talk about in terms of working with the press. Because I think there is a tendency sometimes, maybe more historically, and I think it's changing some in California media, but for reporters to, parachute into a community without knowing who lives there or the sort of history of an area and tell a story maybe in a way that victimizes residents or that perpetuates stereotypes about a certain culture or about low-income people. And so I think that when we're reaching out to reporters, and when we're considering like connecting them with residents who may be impacted, like there's a certain level of education, I think, that's required. And we have a resource, as I said, that we'll follow up with for like how you can sort of prep reporters to cover your community in a sensitive and competent way, and then how you can follow up when they get the story wrong. And Maraid, I'd love to turn back to you to share any examples of harmful stories or beliefs that CWC has worked to overcome, and or times when you've had to educate reporters about how to cover residents in communities where you work.
Yes, part of my job when it comes to media is just to first off have an initial conversation with the reporters, get a sense of what story they're trying to tell, get a sense on how they're trying to reach out to community partners. And so if I see it as a space where people might be put in uncomfortable positions or they might be framed in ways that don't seem empowering, at that point, it's when I'll most likely say, actually, this is not a media opportunity we will participate in. But good luck to you as you continue to develop your story. So it's important to know that not all media opportunities are worth taking, just from the get-go. And when they are, and we do our calls, we do our screenings, we see what kind of story they get to, it doesn't always guarantee that it'll be 100% positive experience. So one example is one of our community partners, she speaks, she's primarily a Spanish speaker, but she can speak English. However, she does not feel very comfortable speaking English, and this was something I mentioned to a reporter. The reporter, unfortunately, really took advantage of the fact that she could speak Spanish and, well, English, and tried to shift the whole interview in English, even though we had spoken before this, that we would prefer to do it in Spanish, just for the comfort of our community partner. We had to follow up with our community partner and say, next time it's okay to push back because these are things we've established. I had to reach out after to the community, to the reporter and say, we appreciate the coverage. We appreciate your interest on these important topics. But we would really like to just stick to things we've established beforehand to ensure just the comfort of our community partners. So just looking out for issues like that where you try to make sure everyone feels comfortable, but reporters sometimes say, actually, I might want to do it this way. There's always ways to follow up. And also just the issue where reporters sometimes see that they would like to speak to an expert, whether that be a colleague of mine, or and then they would also like to speak to a community partner who is experiencing everything. So really they really separate those two categories of an expert versus someone impacted. And we always like to point out that our community partners are also experts. They are the people that raise these issues to us. They tell us about the logistics they have to go through. They tell us about how inaccessible items are for them at times. So they are the experts in drinking water issues alongside of us. It's not just us being the experts and they're providing the experience. So we really work to highlight that with these reporters and reinforce that narrative that we're working together and there's no expert victim combination here. There's rather just we're providing more of that technical assistance, this information sharing, and they're providing us their local expertise on how we move forward with stories. So those are just two different instances on moments that might story narratives that tend to appear in the media, moments that might feel uncomfortable in the media, and how we try to navigate those spaces.
I think I'm back up next. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I see also like comments in the chat echoing what you've been saying, as well as Tom's comment about needing to set an organizational boundary about media outlets they work with and don't, based on some negative experience. This one is more from online trolls than anything a journalist did. But I think having those kinds of standards, boundaries is totally acceptable. And we all have to make sure we're prioritizing the health and well-being of ourselves and our community over anything else, for sure. So I think that's generally a pretty good practice if you come up against an issue like that over and over with someone, setting that standard for yourself. The next thing I wanted to cover is a little bit on the like logistics. We've sort of been talking about like best practices and framing and how to come up with a newsy news hook, but then what do you actually do to get attention? So for and again, this is laid out in a resource that Aurora and the Rose Foundation team will share after the event. So if you don't remember everything we say, it will all be in writing later. But the first step is to really build a targeted list of journalists that you want to reach out to. One of the biggest frustrations that we hear from journalists in our work is that they are inundated with pitches and emails that are not relevant to what they cover. And so for the sake of efficiency, like sometimes it can feel like I'm just going to throw spaghetti at the wall and see what sticks. And sometimes that's what you have to do, because it actually takes a little bit more time to be targeted, but it can be, I think, extra effective to kind of have a priority list for yourself, to spend a little bit of time doing some research, just doing this through Google searches, and as you read the paper or watch your local news, or if there's a blog or podcast in your area, just identifying a handful of those reporters who either are kind of covering your community broadly and maybe don't have an issue area expertise, or if there's a couple folks who are covering more deeply the issue that you are working on generally. And so what we recommend is to kind of start with that list. If you're starting from scratch, I think it's helpful to just have like a handful of folks that you want to build a relationship with, and then introduce yourself. Send an informal email with some information about you and your organization and what you're working on, an invitation to chat over the phone or to get a coffee together. Even if there's not something timely happening, that can be really helpful. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think when you're talking about that, starting those relationships, looking out for who might be covering that, it's also just great if you have social media channels and they have a good story that you're like, hey, we didn't work on that directly with them, but that's a great story that's related to these issues. Let's share that on social media. And reporters notice those kinds of things. They're like, oh, they shared my article. Or sending an email back to them, say, hey, great article on this issue. We'd love to further discuss like potential issues down the line with what you're covering. Those can be great entryways just to start building those relationships, whether it's a retweet of the story with a quote, whether it's just telling them they had a great story. Those are also just entryways from building your list to also starting those relationships.
Yeah, that's thank you for adding that. That's a great point. I would say only do that if you actually liked what they wrote. But We also hear from reporters that we work with a lot. Their inboxes are outside of kind of the PR pitching that they get, more filled with negative, vitriol, abusive emails, especially folks who cover climate and the environment, than anything else. So getting a nice note from someone who's appreciative of the reporting that they're doing does go a long way. Similarly, if you see a story where there was maybe something you felt was like mischaracterized or could have been reported better, that's also an opportunity for you to, I would say, start with like a private email rather than like bashing someone online, although there's a time and a place for that, of course. If you want to offer to further chat with them about an issue or introduce them to community members who are impacted so they can hear the full story, that's another way to do it. And by having those lines of communications open, then when something is really happening, you have that kind of pre-existing relationship. This works particularly well for folks who are kind of covering the place where you work. The other thing I'd say I will note before I turn it back to Nicole is the logistics around how to get the word out and how to reach reporters. There's a couple of different tools that you can use, which we also lay out and link to some templates in the resource that we will share with you. So there's your good old-fashioned email. I find this to be the most effective when you are reaching out to reporters in an individual way. Again, that kind of tailored, personalized message, a short email that says who you are, why the issue that you work on is important, why it's relevant to the reporter that you're asking to cover it, and some suggestions of people that they can talk to, whether that be yourself, community members, other allies, organizations. That's we call that like a media note, which is basically just an email. It's pretty informal. And it's directed to one or a handful of journalists individually, is probably the thing that we use the most in our outreach and as a tool, which it's just more informal, more relational, more about building that rapport and asking specifically them to cover something. Another tool you can use is a press release. It's kind of a tried and true tactic, and it's has some kind of specific formatting, which if you're a history buff, is actually tied to like how like fax machines and telegraphs and things like that worked back in the day. And today is sort of a little bit of a dinosaur, but I think is still a really useful tool, particularly if there's something like a report that's coming out or an event that's happening. And that is basically you writing your dream news article with all of your, with your quotes and the key messages in there. Again, we have a template we can share. And I would say that, again, is really useful if you want to send the same thing to a lot of people. I would recommend doing a press release about something when there's something really timely that's happened or is being released that's time sensitive. The third tool is something called a media advisory, and that's something that we use when there's an event. It's basically the party invite to whatever that event is. It has the who, the what, the when, and the where, and a little bit of background. And so if you're hosting a rally or a meeting or a protest or a press conference where people are speaking, that's the tool that you would use there. I see a question from Edith about how to build a list. Who do you send these emails and press releases to? I think that the short answer is just doing some internet searching to see who's writing about a topic in your area, who's written on similar issues. If you're fighting a particular bad actor, like a company or a politician, who has written about them in the past. And then just trying to find their email address. If that's something that you're kind of struggling with, the Water Hub actually has uses some public relations tools that help us get access to email addresses of reporters and things like that. So I think through the Rose Foundation, I'm sure we would be happy to assist if you are like, I need to know who's writing about this issue in this place. We would be happy to do a search and send you back a list that would help you narrow that down. But a lot of it's just a good old-fashioned Google and reading the newspaper, unfortunately. It's kind of basically what we do. And then I think, yeah, please feel free. I'm sure we'll share our contact info in the follow-up. So yeah, I'll turn it back to Nicole for the what to do after part.
Yeah. It's our last section, and then we'll open it up for more discussion and question and answer. When you reach out to reporters, there are sort of two possibilities, right? Often we don't get a story, at least not the first try. And when that happens, there are a couple of choices. We can use the elements of story that we've already put together for our pitch or press release and turn them into a blog on our websites or posts for Instagram or Facebook or X. You can put them in an email or a letter to decision makers, or recruit some of the community members that you had planned to offer to reporters as contacts and invite them to speak directly with decision makers, either through something like a lobby day where Marai was sharing some examples from Community Water Center's work, or testifying at a permitting hearing for a new industrial facility or a city council meeting, an agency meeting. And then, as I said earlier, in terms of getting attention on long-standing or slow-moving issues, we think events can be really powerful, and that can be a tour of the impacted residents' homes. It can be a tour of the polluting sites or the places that polluting sites are proposed, to get a sense again of how close they are to where people live and play. And a way to make those tours or events more newsworthy sometimes is to think about seasons. So if you're talking about flooding, plan it right after a storm. If you're talking about drought, probably the summertime. If you're talking about, sea level rise, looking at the tide charts and figuring out when is the highest tide. The king tides tend to happen in the winter. And then, often, even if you can't get a reporter to cover a story, you may be able to get a letter to the editor printed, or an opinion editorial, which is a longer article that's authored by someone with a connection to the issue. I saw Tom posted that their organization wrote monthly letters to the editor and eventually was invited to have a monthly column. So I think that kind of persistence. When I was working on underwater parks, we also at least monthly submitted letters to the editor, op-eds from residents, fishermen, from divers, from local seafood businesses, from schools that were doing outdoor education. So thinking about all the different voices that have something to add to the conversation, and inviting those people to all share on whatever platform you can get access to. But in the happy event that you do get a story, even if it's in your small local paper, how can you maximize the impact of that? For the person who asked earlier in the chat about how do we get stories to go bigger when we can get them covered in Calaveras County, I think they said, but we can't get the Chronicle or the Sacramento Bee to pay attention. I think sometimes actually pulling together some links to local stories and explaining what isn't being covered or what's relevant statewide, how this might be part of a trend that we're seeing across the state, either as the climate changes or as industrial interests are winning out over public health concerns. That can help actually using local press to try to show the importance of your issue. The other thing is actually making sure that that story gets seen by whoever the decision maker is. And I've heard Mari's, some of her colleagues who work in policy talk about like literally printing out a story and delivering it to the mailboxes, right, of legislators in the Capitol. And I don't know, Mari, if you have anything more you want to share about the way that Community Water Center maximizes the impact of the news stories you do get.
Yeah, definitely. So we always, first off, thank the reporter. We are sharing the story that we were included in through our socials. We're making sure that on our newsletter, it's like, here's what's been going on in the news. And if policy folks are included, we send it to them. I know sometimes especially if it's good press, they're always excited, like, oh yes, we got good press on this. We're tied to community actions. And that oftentimes that can sometimes help you establish even deeper relationships with legislators, with decision makers, local, statewide, and they'll start seeing you as the actual voice authority on these issues. They might reach out to you for feedback on policy, and this is how media can help create that identity of your organization, where you're an authority, you're a voice of authority you're an expert in your issue, whether it's drinking water, whether it's the contamination some folks were talking about before. They start noticing that because they start realizing, oh, are in the news, people are speaking out about this, they're getting attention. These are people that we need to be connecting with as we're putting together policy. So it's a line that comes together to really build up relationships, and then other reporters notice as well. So it can even open up the path to speak to a legislator, to speak to a state regulator and say, hey, we're interested in pitching this story. Would you be interested in participating with us down the line? It'll be a story about community action, about what we're doing to solve this issue. So that could become attractive for a media person who sees, hey, we have community partners involved in this story, and we also have a decision maker involved in the story, and that makes for a really powerful story down the line. So that could also help boost the appeal of a story when you're pitching that.
Thank you so much, Mari. That is the end of the sort of key points that we wanted to share. Again, we'll re-share them all in a worksheet and a guide that will go out after this along with the recording, and we'll include our contact information. But I'd love to open it up now for questions or for sharing from the group, either success stories or challenges that you've encountered. As we're waiting, I just wanted to highlight, let's see, Tom mentioned in the chat that he had a resident bring her clogged well filter to the Board of Supervisors in Calaveras County. We've definitely seen some of our partners in California bring bottled water to show how discolored or how much sediment is in bottled water. So I think those sorts of like visual aids can be really powerful, either as a prop for a hearing, or as, if you're tabling outside of a hearing, outside of city council, if you want to share something with reporters. And actually, this is something that we don't do as much anymore, that a lot of reporters work from home. But if you have a newspaper or radio station in your community, in the olden days of media relations, we used to sometimes stop by and bring these sorts of props. So if you actually have an office with reporters in it, sometimes that can work. But can also be even scarier than picking up the phone.
One thing I can add that can be helpful, especially as I am sure many of you wear many hats and do many things, is trying to be efficient. And if there's something that you're doing, like your organization is going door to door to educate people about an issue, or you're having a community meeting, even if you you want it to not be like a pitch for the media, if there's a reporter you're trying to build a relationship with or educate on an issue, I would do this kind of use your judgment and sparingly, but invite them to come along with you, not to write about, but just to learn the background of something. And that can be a good way to build a relationship and to educate them about an issue, even if you're not asking them to write a story about the whatever's happening.
Can I ask my question?
Please.
Oh, well, my situation is that I'm working in Calaveras County on a general plan litigation, and the case has been moving slowly, so it's been sort of not so much in the news. But next year in 2025, it's going to court. It's going to be very active, and so while our local paper covers our issues just fine, I want, when this thing goes to court and it gets activated again, I want to be able to get it to the Chronicle and the Sacramento Bee and the Stockton Record. So that's how that's the the leap I'm trying to make. And a couple of your suggestions were really good. But do you have any others before we finish up here today?
I think, Tom, this is piggybacking on what I had kind of said earlier, and it's definitely adds a little more homework on your plate. But if you can search around and see if there's similar contentious general plan issues, I feel like I've seen this come up in a bunch of different places to try to show that there's like a structural governance issue in terms of how well the state is going to be able to, I don't know exactly what the issue is, but like, the state has all these goals around climate, environmental protections, but in many ways they're hung up because the county plans don't, in aggregate, help the state get towards those goals. And so I think that could be a good way to do that and to bring attention and light to the issue in your community.
One other idea, Tom, that we've used sometimes is like a virtual press conference. We call them media briefings. And even if the issue is on the general plan, we might frame it differently. We might be like Calaveras County 2050, right? There are two futures. It could be a safe haven, or it could be a disaster zone. And I'll drop in the chat a briefing that we did about the Central Valley, and basically it's climate future, right? Right now we know that the Central Valley is on the front lines of drought, of heat, of flooding, and fires and smoke. And we're sort of at a crossroads in terms of how we handle those issues. And we framed it as Central Valley 2040. Like, is it going to be a model for how we build resilience, or is it going to be a case study in missed opportunities for prevention and preparedness? So I think sort of zooming out from the process thing, the general plan, which can be sort of boring and technical and legal, and focusing on like what is at stake.
100%. And to add to that, I know with groundwater, sometimes you've had an issue reaching reporters, but we just know when it comes to a pivotal decision, when it comes to a pivotal hearing, we know that that's when media tends to sort of poke their heads out a little bit more and be interested. So something that we've worked on is maybe 2 weeks out, we start sending just our pitch to reporters, just an alert saying, hey, this is going to happen. This is what that means. As Nicole was saying, it could either mean we're going to protect drinking water for residents, or they're going to have to continue suffering these devastating impacts that they're facing now. And sort of pitching it as this kind of a build-up to that event so that they get that background. They start maybe doing their own research on what's going on, and they keep you in mind saying, Actually, Tom sent me an email about that, and he said he was going to pull some community partners to be at maybe this important event right here. We might want to reach out to him to get more details because this looks like it's going to be a very important decision, with crucial actors involved.
Thank you.
So I'll volunteer a story. I am not part of the social media generation. And so it's been a little bit challenging for my group. We are trying to protect open land. You can see a picture behind me, a little bit north of Sacramento from development. And one of the things we got very lucky with is two social media people locally who were willing to post on, Facebook and Nextdoor and so on to help us reach local residents because they don't know that this development is moving forward, and it's truly astonishing in a matter of about 2 months from our struggles to reach people through HOAs and so on. These two media sites, I mean, one person does cats and dance music, but we're getting to people and having them show up at our meetings, which is very exciting.
Edith, that's great luck. I'm very, grateful that you found these folks. Have you tried any earned media? Like, what has been the effort on trying to get any of this covered by reporters?
Aurora, thank you. That's an interesting question. So the person who leads our effort is the former mayor of Sacramento, and she's got a lot of contacts. So we are probably able to, and she's a very interesting person and she's very photogenic. So people like to interview her in front of, green fields with mustard. So that has been really, really helpful for us, her contacts in that direction. And when, she sends letters to the city council and to the supervisors, we believe they read them. But it's been much harder for us to reach the community people who just don't know that this is happening around them. Looks like Susan has her hand up.
One of our best opportunities is somebody very much smarter than I wrote an op-ed, and instead of putting it in the local paper, they put it in the paper in Jefferson City where our capital is. And we heard back from our former governor, who was actually from DeSoto. And so he came here and he helped us, but he said, I didn't understand the flooding problem until I seen it myself where I live now. He said, now I understand. So that was a great opportunity. Go to your capital of your state and put the op-ed in instead of just trying for the locals. It made a huge difference.
Yeah, Susan, congratulations, first of all. That's incredible. I mean, I'll just share in many states, it can be really difficult to get into the statewide paper. And so just for those who are working in California, there are a couple of different publications that reach people in Sacramento. There is, of course, the Sacramento Bee, but there's also Capital Weekly and Cal Matters, which has a particular commitment to elevating underrepresented voices. And so, yeah, we often have like a 5 plan A, plan B, plan C, and plan D, because it can often take multiple attempts to get an op-ed published, and you might not get into the paper that you had first hoped for, but when you can, it's great. So aim high.
I'm curious, how many times would you attempt to reach out to a particular reporter about a particular story? Like, do you send a follow-up email? Do you send just one per reporter? What do you guys do?
That's a really good question, actually, Aurora. I'd say it probably depends a little bit on if you know them or not, but typically ahead of if there's a press release or an event that we're trying to recruit for, I would send probably no more than 3 emails, because you don't want to annoy people and get on the do not open list. But I think one that's like the intro, a follow-up, and then if there's like the day of, just a reminder this is happening, I think is a good point. I would also, I don't think I necessarily need to harp on this too much with this crowd, but picking up the old phone can be a helpful thing to do. It's my least favorite thing is to call an actual human being, but the power of even if just you're leaving a voicemail and introducing yourself and saying that you sent them an email and wanting to know if they saw it and heard from and were interested, will, I would say, double the chances that you get a response, even if that response is, I can't cover this right now. So that is something I would do. I think it's a little harder as people are not in the office, because the phone number on the main switchboard for their outlet might not get to them. But as you get to know people or can ask for the best contact number, which might be their cell phone number, I would say using that sparingly when it matters, but send an email, make a phone call, send one follow-up, I would say is generally right. A non-answer is usually either a polite no or a didn't see it. So that's my tip. If it's someone you know quite well and have built a rapport, and you feel comfortable sending them a text message, that can also be a useful way to just say, hey, I sent you an email, something's happening, do you have time? And if they don't, they'll just say not right now, and that's okay too.
Thanks for that, Sarah. Before people drop off, I just want to say we put a quick survey into the chat. It shouldn't take more than a couple minutes. We would love your feedback about this session, about any of the sessions that you attended, or ideas that you have for future training events that Rose could put on. If there are other topics that would be of interest or use to you and your organization, please let us know. It helps us improve these trainings and it helps us plan for the future. So yeah, thank you so much, Sarah, Nicole, Mariette. It is amazing to have you here, and this has been very useful advice. We're going to have everything posted on our website, and I'm going to send everything out in an email as soon as I get the recording ready. But thank you so much for your time and you sharing your expertise with us today.
Thanks for having us. And thanks to everyone for joining.